Greetings and welcome back to the Old Ways Rising Farm YouTube channel for another installment in our Make Your Own Outdoors Backpack series. So in this video we are going to be continuing this project and fully assembling the body of the pack. Okay? So at this point you can see where we're headed with all of it. We have the front pack here, which is intended to hold a poncho and a fire kit, right? The things that you would want to get to quickly without having to go into all the rest of your pack. And then we have the bucket of the main pack, okay? We are attaching all of the internal frame components and sewing all of it up against the rope harness, which is the main weight-bearing member of this pack and carries everything with it. So the majority of the work that we're doing here is all hand stitching. Much of it, if not most of it, you could do on a heavy machine. If you have a heavy sewing machine capable of working with leather and heavy canvas, go for it. Use that, of course. But I don't. So I'm doing this hand stitching, and I want to show you that even in the absence of a machine like that, you can build this pack. What we are using for our material is a heavy flax thread, okay, and a number 16 sail needle. Okay, that is the tool that we're using for all of this, along with a sewing palm. Okay, we made the sewing palm in a previous video. I do want to do, just here at the beginning of this, a little bit of an update on the sewing palm that we made in that previous video. And I mentioned two uncertainties. One was, would the pith hold up in the center of this tine that we used for the main press point? And the answer is no. It has not held up, and I am going to need to modify that. What I'm planning to do is, several times I've had to come and dress it, okay, and just kind of carve it back down to flat, because I had a problem with the holes in it getting eroded too deeply, and then when I would bend it, it would kind of twist the eye of the needle. So I actually broke 2 sail needles in the process of this. So that has not held up. What I'm planning to do is just keep dressing it until it's deep enough to put in an insert, and I'm just going to cut out a little oblong bit of bone that matches the inside dimensions of that, put that in there and drill some divots in that. So I'm going to modify that in that way. And my other concern with this sewing palm was just the thickness of leather being too flexible, and that concern was also valid. So I'm going to just cut these seams apart. The size is good. It's stretched out a little bit. So I'm going to cut off a little bit of material, cut the seams out, use this as a pattern, trace it onto some thicker leather, and re-sew it down. Because as this leather has stretched, it worked against its stitches, and the bone just kind of gradually wore through the stitching. Okay, but the design is good, but the two material shortcomings I was worried about were in fact founded. So I wanted to give you an update after having done a lot of sewing with this stitching palm on how it works. Basic design, good. Material selection needs some modification. Right, but this is the prototyping process. You make it, you work with it for a while, and then you iterate, right? So when I rebuild this, I'm going to use, I have some thicker leather to hand. I'm going to use the thicker leather, and I'm just going to glue a little bone insert into the pressure plate surface. Okay, so not a big deal. We make, we live, we learn, we remake. That's the build process. So, without further ado, let's get into sewing the pack, and you'll see how we assemble everything. Before we get into the sewing steps, I just want to talk about the thread that I'm using. Now, there's a lot of options here. You could do this with artificial sinew. You could do this with a heavy cotton nylon. You could do this with bookbinders, flax. You could do this with cobbler's thread. There's a lot of different options, but you want a thick, durable, strong thread to make your stitches, okay? Because a backpack is a heavy-duty thing. Now, what I have is I have a little stash of this. It's a single-ply flax yarn that I've been using. It's a yarn because it's single-ply, right? Like, that's kind of the definition of a yarn. Yarn is one-ply twist. That's what it means. So, you know, when you twist yarns, when you ply yarns together, you get a twine, and then when you ply twines together, you get a rope. Okay, and then big ropes have even more terms. So, 2-ply is technically a twine, 1-ply is technically a yarn. This is a very nice flax yarn, but it's kind of a homespun, so there's thick and thin spots. And I've been having some trouble with it breaking at the thin spots. So one side will break, the other side won't. We're going to cut off a section. We're going to thread the needle. Okay. You can get cotton ball thread. The thin stuff people use for small macrame projects like that, that would work well for this. I have a personal preference of always sewing the material with itself if I can. So since I'm using cellulose-based fabric, I'm going to prefer a cellulose-based thread. That way stiffness and abrasion are symmetrical. If I was using a nylon fabric, I would be using a nylon thread. But that's not writ in stone. Okay, you do you. You work on your own preferences. That's just a personal preference. If I didn't have this, I would probably default to artificial sinew, which is a nylon product. Okay. So to strengthen this and to twist it, we're going to fully double it on the needle. Right? And I brought it so that the ends are matched right there. And then we're going to spread those ends out. And pay attention to the twist direction. You can do it, you'll get a right or a left hand twist depending on which way you point the needle. Okay? So if you start doing this and it's untwisting the twist which is already in it, just switch and do it with your other hand. And it will be perfect. Okay? I can't predict that for you because I'm looking at the thread I have, not the thread you have. Just pay attention to that when you do the first one. So I'm going to leave a few inches there. Little V, roll it with my hand, and then let it twist together, and help it twist by spinning my needle, okay, to lock it down. And then I'm going to grab right where it joins, make sure that my ends are not twisting into a knot here at the end of my piece, and then do it again. Okay. Run my thumb through the ends, separate them, make sure they're not getting twisted into a knot, and then do it again. This is the easiest way to lay up a simple, small length of twine. You don't need a lot of rope making equipment for just a little piece like this. It's basically the same as what we did back in the grommet video, but I wanted to do it here in case somebody said, nah, I'm going to use metal grommets, so just skip that one. This is just called the leg twist method, or leg roll method. The end. Okay. Then we get to the end, tie a knot so it doesn't untwist on us. And that will lodge in the fabric when we start. And off we go. Now we're going to start assembling the front flap and the back panel. Okay, we're going to do all of this piece first because this has the most going on with it of any of the pieces, and it's going to get real congested, making order of operations very important to moving through this piece. Okay, because we're going to end up with 3 or 4 parts getting stitched on to a couple places, especially right down here. So we want to do, before we start making problems for ourselves, we want to accomplish everything that we can do simply and easily that won't get in the way of something else. Okay, do that first. So that is going to start with this front flap pouch. Okay? So there's going to be the pouch that we can put a poncho in, and here's the flap for that pouch. Since this is on the front flap, I'm calling this the flat flap because I think it's funny. So we have our pouch pocket and we have our flat flap. we're obviously going to do the pocket first. Now I want to set this so that the base goes right across the top of those two grommets. Keep it as low as possible on here. And then just with your eyes, make it even. Okay? This is one of those situations. Your eyes are very good at finding center, and you're probably going to be more accurate just looking like this than trying to do a whole bunch of measurements. Okay? So we get that situated, and then on thick materials like this, I like to use these clips. I think they'll reach in far enough for most of it. At least they will there at the top. Might have to bunch up the side a little bit, but that's okay. There's a couple more. I would love to have one size bigger, but these are the biggest I got. Trying to pin into this thick fabric is kind of a fool's errand. And always fold these little tabs down over so they don't get in your way. Okay. And if at any point this comes apart, take them off, readjust, recenter, and go back. Now, to start this, we're going to do a double row of stitches all the way around. Okay? And I'm going to start at the top corner, and I want to do one row of stitches right through the middle of the hem. And since I have stay stitches and I double stitch this hem, I can see those two lines. So I'm going to just trace those two lines of existing stitches. Okay? One right in the corner, and then one further in. It doesn't matter which one we do first. Okay? So we're going to start and we're going to punch through. I'm actually going to start just off the edge for the first stitch. Okay. Pull that through. And I'm going to do the outside first because I chose to, not because that's a critically important thing. Make a stitch down. That is, we're going through 5 thicknesses of cloth, so that's going to take some force on Mr. Sail Needle.
Watch your fingers.
I have bled on this already.
Mm-hmm. I know.
And then flex sealed it and immortalized it. Okay. Stitch number 1. Now, make sure that you leave enough of a tag here that you can tie that. And we're just going to do that right now. Tie a little knot in that while we're here, and it's easy to adjust. Because we're going to do a single pass. We aren't going to come back and tie this at the end like some of the other stitching patterns. The rationale is that when I'm thinking about my stitching, I either want to hide it or show it off. Okay? Since I'm not going to hide this, I'm going to show it off. So I'm going to use a decorative stitch, which in leather thong stitching is called an S-stitch, or in needlepoint is called a stem stitch. And it looks like a little S-shaped weave. And it's an attractive stitch, so our line doesn't look like an eyesore, it looks deliberate and finished. Okay? Now that that's tied off, I'm going to go back in the starting hole. Okay. Flip this back over. And now I'm going to stitch down twice the length of the first stitch. Okay. I'm going to pull this most of the way in, but not all the way. I want to leave a loop. Now we backstitch into the second hole that we made. Okay. That is a tough lump of fabric to get that through. Okay. And now we want to make sure, this is why we leave a loop here, because we're going to come through, when we come up, we want the thread to come up inside of this loop. Okay? If we pull that down, it's easy to punch through it. We don't want to go up through it, we want to go inside of it. Okay, so this goes that way, this goes this way. Now, I'm choosing to do this to the inside. You could also choose this to do it to the outside. It will change the direction or change the direction and flow of the twist a little bit, but they both look equally nice. What is very important is that you always do it the same way. So if you start with your thread to the inside of the loop, always have your thread to the inside of the loop. Now we pull the loop tight on the outside. Then we pull the loop tight on the inside. Okay? Now we do the next one. Now that that's secure, we can take off the first clip. Get annoying things out of the way. Okay? Now, we're going to come down. We're not going to go in the existing hole. We're going to go that distance again. Make another stitch. Leave a little bit of a loop. Back stitch into the previous hole. Coming inside the loop, because that's the direction we chose. Okay. Pull the upper loop closed. Pull the inner loop closed. Just like so. Okay? And we do it again. Same pattern. Come down our stitch distance. Down through. Back stitch previous hole. Make sure the loop is to the outside, the needle is to the inside. Push it through. Cinch the upper loop. Cinch the inner loop. Then keep going. We'll keep going down, just tracing over my existing hems. Okay. We'll go down all the way around, and we'll come back and we'll do a second row. This front pocket is all stitched on. You can see this is that stem stitch all the way around in the two parallel seams, so it's double stitched. Now, this is not, the pattern doesn't show up quite as well in thin thread as it does in a thick thonging. So I just brought out my buckskin shirt here, and you can see that that's that S-weave. Okay. This is done exactly the same way as this is done, but here in thick thonging it shows up a lot better. And even though the S pattern is a little bit more subdued, it looks even and finished, right? So if you look at, the in-out stitch on the back, either here where again you can see it better because of the thonging, and then the same thing here, right? The in-out stitch of a regular running stitch or saddle stitch. I don't know. I just don't think it looks quite as finished, right? So whether it's a really bold pattern in a thick material or a subtle pattern in a thin material, it looks nice and finished and clean. And I like that. If my stitches are going to show, I want to show them off a little bit. Okay? So now the next thing we need to do is we need to put on the pocket flap, or as I'm calling it, the flat flap, because it's the flap on the flat. And we're going to do this with the same stitch across the top here. And again, a double row through each of the using each of the pre-existing machine stitched hemlines as our guide to keep everything nice and even. So to position this, I was looking over here at the flat flap on the Yucca pack, and this is about 3 inches, kind of where it sagged down here in the middle a little. So I'm going to give this a 3-inch spacing. It could be more, it could be less. It's not going to ruin your project if you decided to go 2 inches or 4 inches. I'm going to go 3 inches because I want to. So there's 3 inches there. Keep it nice and even. 3 inches there. Double check the first one. It did move just a little bit. Take the time to get it nice and even. You won't regret it. There's always enough time to do it right the first time. And again, we're just going to clip this down the sides to keep it where we put it. And then more of the same across the top. Okie dokie. So we have this top flap sewn on again, double stitch, right? Double stitch with that same stitch. See, it folds up nice. There's plenty of room to get our hands in the pocket. The pocket's nice. Everything's neat and straight and tidy. Now, remember when we set this up, this bottom pouch of the pocket, we did the grommets first, and then we oriented the bottom of the pocket vis-a-vis the grommets. Okay? The same thing is going to be true on the back panel. So the back panel is going to have more going on than any other piece of this assembly, and we need to do all of that first, okay? But all of that's going to orient over the actual finished edges of the panel, and that's going to be determined by sewing in the rope harness. So we're going to put this in here. We're going to sew the bottom up and fully encase that in just exactly the same way as we did on the bottom piece, right? The bottom piece here. And then we're going to sew the side flaps along the vertical support. Okay? Once that's done, we will have a hard and fast idea where everything is going to line up. Now, I'm going to sew this in. We might need to jockey around here a little bit at the top of this to get everything to line up. And eventually, we're going to fold this little tab where we cut in. Okay? We're going to fold that little tab down to finish off that top corner. Okay? I'm not going to worry about that too much right now. But if you think about everything that's going on here, we're going to have the curve stay on the outside, bending it with that curve. We're going to have the vertical stays here and here on the inside. And then we've also got to get all of the strapping attached. Okay, and all of that has to work around this rope harness. So we're going to get that stitched in, just folding and stitching, normal straight running stitch, kind of I think of it as sort of a cowboy or mountain man version of the saddle stitch, where we go running stitch one way, turn and go running stitch the other, and end where we started. Just that simple stitch across, nothing fancy, nothing glamorous, stitching in the rope harness. Then we will have the hard and fast references that we need to arrange the rest of the parts that go into this. One last little note here before I actually start stitching. When you're laying this stuff out, in this thick material, especially with this bulky seam, you're never going to get pins in that. So binder clips are your friend. Get it all in close, clip it down, and it will help you hold things in place really well as you're getting to go with your stitching. And then the second thing is, it takes a lot of practice to keep your stitches straight in thick material. Okay, so be conscious of that. You'll get really woogity stitches on this just because there's so much of a gap here. There's so much material. If your needle is going kind of at an angle one way or the other, it can actually move quite a bit of horizontal distance, and you can kind of get slightly drunken stitch lines. Okay, so it's not catastrophic as that happens. I got some drunken stitch lines here on the bottom. Yeah, right there I got some drunken stitch line a little bit going on. Here I got a little bit of that going on. And here I was working late at night, tired and bad lighting conditions, and I got a bit of drunken stitch right there. Right, so it happens. I'm guilty of it too, but it's something to watch and be careful of, because the more you minimize this, the cleaner your finished product is going to look. I hope that you're enjoying this content, and if you are, I would love to invite you to join our Patreon page and the community over there. The Patreon and that funding is super important for this channel as well as most YouTube channels. It just takes resources to do these things, to buy materials, to go on trips, to go interview people, to do activities, and we're trying to build and make the channel better in all of those categories. So we're super grateful for everybody who's already there. And if you would like to come and join the ranks of those folks, we have a lot of rewards for the folks who do join on the Patreon. We have a large repository of historic information on traditional skills that have been re-indexed and edited and produced in easy-to-print formats, and formats that are easy to put into a page reader. And it's indexed by skill rather than all of the random ways that it was indexed in the past, so you could access what you want. We also have a lot of plans and patterns for various projects, like this shoulder bag that we're going to replicate here soon. The fur stretchers behind me are another example, and all of that library becomes an infinite access resource to you when you join the Patreon at any of the paid tiers, even at $1 a month. If you don't want to join that way, they can be purchased as individual downloads as well. And we're just so grateful for everybody who's there and wanted to invite you. So, hope to see you there, but I also hope you're enjoying this video, which we'll get back to right now. I wanted to show just a little bit better what we're doing with this rope harness after I got all of this set up. So you can see where we're going with it. Okay. Especially if I just kind of fold that in and hold it with my fingers a little. Okay, so that's one side of it there. Now, these corners are a little bit tricky, and that's why I've done double bar tacks, 1/4 inch in from the corner and 3/4 inch in from the corner. Because in order to fold this side up, we have to take this loose loop, slide it into the seam, fold that over, and then fold this up. But you can see it's bunching right around the rope. So what we have to do to solve that is to position the rope and then snip in, okay, to relieve that bunching. And then those two bar tacks in those two locations, I have a lot of freedom. Even if I snip through one, I won't snip through both. And, you know, since when I do those bar tacks, I go forward, back, forward, the threads are thoroughly tangled in each other. So even if I cut through the lower bar tack, either side of it will still be there to help against fraying. Okay, so that'll keep that snip contained even under load. Okay, but you can see where that loose loop is. This is also why we're using loose loops here instead of a tight 90-degree splice attachment. Fold that over. Okay. And then we can clip that there. And then this, we can still push on it inside. This will be free to turn when we attach the other pieces. So I'm going to stitch right through here, including fastening the end of this side when I stitch the bottom, and then I'll stitch up the side separately. These 3 sides are all stitched up, and again, this is just sort of our, mountain man saddle stitch kind of thing going on. They're not perfect, but they're pretty good, and it takes, good golly, this is certainly not the first time I've run a needle back and forth a few hundred times in a row, but there's such a wide gap when you're stitching through there. The angle has to be perfect. That takes practice. So every seam's a little better, and that's normal. Now, you can really see here how this rope harness is working. Okay, so when we get the front flap, that will wrap around 3 sides just like the back flap. Okay, and the front flap will wrap around the front, around the top as well. So I position this so that the spliced side with these little loose ends will get bundled, because if I just turn this upside down there, obviously it'll be on the other side, right? This will end up wrapping around that, okay? Just like we did on the others. So this will get hemmed in this way on all 4 sides, whereas this piece, one of the very last things we're going to do is just stitch this down so it doesn't flop around there. Okay, so that'll just get stitched flush, and it won't get bundled in. So you will see that piece of rope in the final construction. Now, there's still a lot of stuff to sew on the inside of this back panel, and we want to do that now while it's accessible and less of a pain in the neck. So we need our holders for the stays, okay? So one will go there, and this is where we need these seams to line up on, okay? We're going to put that stay support, stay bag, stay holder, stay, I don't know. We'll call it a stay. How about that? That one will go there. This one will go here, right as flush as possible against that seam. So the straighter you get this, the nicer that will look. And then these will get the straight wooden pieces down in them to stiffen it vertically. Okay? So how we're going to do this is when we stitch these stays down, we will stitch on 3 sides, leave it open, slide that in, and then stitch across the top. That will be both of those. But then the curved stay on the bottom, get those out of the way, it's going to go on the reverse side, but I'm not going to butt it up against the hem. I'm going to overlap the hem. So I'm stitching through 4 layers of fabric there, okay, for a little extra support and extra rigidity, because these vertical guys are just stiffeners. That's just so when you set the backpack down, it'll flop over on itself, right? This is going to be pressured against your back, okay? So I want as much reinforcement as possible, so I'm going to stitch through both seams. However, it goes on the other side. Fold that down in. So what I will be doing is flushing it up against the seam on the show side. Okay? So that will go in like that. And then this will go in like that. And that's going to get pulled up. Okay, so that's the bend in the back. And then this piece will get set there for our airspace. Okay? And then all of this, the extra ends on the webbing and the extra tabs on the stay, will get folded over and stitched to the rope from the other side. Okay? Now, this, if you look at it, is just a little bit too big. So I'm going to go and I'm going to trim a little bit off of each end and just trim it down symmetrically until it looks right. Okay? Once it looks right, I will sand it all the way around. All of the edges on this, as well as these, you can see this one I've already sanded up nice, okay, and done a little math on. You have to do a little math on it, okay. So all these edges are nice and radiused over, okay, whereas this is a raw piece that still needs finished. And this is a raw piece. So once I trim that to what looks like the right width, because I do not want this overlapping the rope. I want it to be inside and with a little bit to spare. I'm going to put a really big beefy radius on the ends of this piece. Okay? And that's because if there is any sharpness to any corner in here, it will rub as you use the backpack. Okay, and that'll just wear a hole right through the canvas. Now, it's not structural in a way that it's going to drop stuff out of your bag, but you could end up having to patch it. And, you know, we don't want to patch things until we really have to. I thought about trying to figure out a way to put a little leather rub pad in there, and I just cannot think up a way to do it. So if you're watching this and building your own and you have a brilliant idea on how to put a leather rub pad in there, please share it in the comment section. So I'm going to do these two things. I'm going to trim this. I'm going to sew this on. Okay. And then we'll insert this and show finishing it up. Then we'll go back and put the vertical pieces on. We have this all sewed up, and I have gone ahead, trimmed, and radiused out this curved stay. Okay, and it fits beautifully. I've already checked it. And, you know, again, I just want to emphasize it is very, very important that you have no corners and no sharp edges on this. It will eat through the canvas in a very short period of time if you have any corners or projections that can grab and pull on the threads. Okay, the wood is more durable than the canvas threads that are woven together into our cloth. Right? Now, that would be a patchable problem, but you don't want to patch it. You put all this work into it, and there's always time to do it right the first time. Okay? So with this, it's going to get sewn in there, and you don't ever want to have to look at it again. Do it right the first time. Sand it good. Now, it doesn't need to be French polished or anything crazy like that. It doesn't have to be sanded to a really high grit, but it needs to be smooth so that there's no splinters and there's no corners or edges to wear on the cloth. Okay? You can see when we put that in, it gives us that nice curve. So I am going to leave these ends unfinished because I may need to take this in and out a couple of times in the process of working on this. But we're now reaching the point where we're going to have a bunch of overlapping parts, and we need to make sure that we don't accidentally sew stuff together that isn't supposed to be sewn together. We are at the point of attaching the rest of the internal support structure for this pack, and I've done one side here to prototype it and figure everything out, and we're going to do the other side here together. So this piece is, if I flip it over, this is what's going to go against the back. And again, remember, we have a curved stay in here. And then there will be, where'd it go? Here it is. A piece of webbing which actually makes contact with the back. Okay? So this is the final structure there. This is the base and the lower mounting point for the shoulder strap. And this is going to get that's going to get folded over with a buckle in there. And I left this a foot long. How much length you need may vary depending on the buckle you get and just how exactly you want to set this all up. So I just designed it to have plenty of extra length in there. It's no big deal to cut off a couple inches of strap. It's really annoying if this is all put together and then you have to take it all apart to put a different strap in. Right? So we don't want that. Note here that we have a leather gusset on the outside to just acts like a washer so that the stitches are pulling against the leather before, on both sides, the stitches are pulling against the leather before they pull against the canvas. And that will just help it from ripping out the canvas and ensure, again, I said this before in this video series, when something fails, and it's always a when, not an if, we want stitches to fail before structural components fail. because it's not that big a deal to put a couple extra stitches in. It's really annoying to have to patch big pieces of rent canvas. And then we have our pocket for the inner stay, for the vertical stay. Now initially I had conceived of this with that pocket going all the way down to the base, but when I started laying things out and looking at it in real space, again, this is a prototype by building project, it was pretty obvious that this was going to lean into the back with that edge and make a really nasty hot spot, so we don't want that, okay? So I rearranged my concept of how the leather lies, so the leather overlaps this pocket to give a little bit of rigidity, and then we're only putting the vertical stay in. I still have to cut this to length, obviously, and finish it down that far, so that can conform to your back. Okay, whatever angle that wants to be, it can sit at, but it's still enough to hold things. There? Is that in view? Okay. But as you can see here, it's still enough support to hold things in alignment very nicely and keep it from being floppy. Okay? So I'm going to take these bits of wood out of their pockets, and this is why we're leaving these open at the top until the last possible moment, because we don't want to have that in there and be fighting with that the whole time we're stitching. And we're going to look at our strap. Now, we're looking at the inside. We want to attach this grain side up, okay? We want to attach it so this corner is right in the middle of the rope. And then we want to lower it about, not quite a quarter, but a little more than an eighth, somewhere in there. We want to lower it, we want to run the seam right in the seam of our pocket, right, of our curved stay pocket. So we want to run that seam right across the bottom of this, okay? And in order to do that, we just need to drop it low enough that it can get in there. And we like I said, we do want this grain side up, because when this is worn, that will wrap around this way, and the grain side will be facing forward when you're wearing it. And that looks nicer. So we're going to put that in there, and we're going to stitch across there, start at the tip and stitch across there to hold this in place. Okay? Then we're going to turn, and we're going to stitch up. Okay? We're going to stay close to this seam. Okay? But while we're doing that, we have our little leather gusset washer. And the leather gusset washer is made just by tracing that. Okay? So the leather gusset washer, you can see, hang on a second. The leather gusset washer is going to be inside of this vertical seam, right? So we can sew across the bottom here and up on this and get it well secured. Then when we get to the tip, we will hold that in place. Okay. And this doesn't have to be perfect. You can see I just kind of trimmed around it when I was done. And when we get to this corner, right, we're going to sew along the bottom seam, up the top seam, hold the gusset washer in here, and then sew along that line. And then go around again to complete our kind of mountain man saddle stitch. Okay? Then in a second operation, we will come and we will complete this triangle inside the washer. Okay? And we will do, you know, across, up, down, across to complete that saddle stitch pattern. So we have one row of stitches inside the gusset and two rows of stitches. See, there's the inside, there's the outside. Most of that's covered up by the edge of our pocket. Okay? but we have 2 rows of stitches in the leather piece. And then as a final move, we will stitch across the leather through the rope. So that's the concept. I will kind of put that in place, sort of kind of like so. Okay. It's going to be a little off one side, versus the other because I just cut that straight, whereas it's actually, kind of a narrower triangle, right? But that's fine. That's not a big deal. We can just trim it. Just a little washer. Okay. So I will start stitching, and at each point where we add something else, I will show you how we're holding it in place. But I'm going to have to do this in my lap very, very carefully. It's very, very fiddly. It's not going to be easy to catch in real time on film. But we want to get this leather strap assembly in before we do the stay pocket. Here's those first 2 lines of stitches. Now down here I got a little wonky, but that's going to get completely covered up, so I don't care. We're not sweating the small stuff. We're making a backpack. Now I'm almost out of thread, but I'll get 2 more passes on this and then fix that. I just wanted to show putting this in. On this one, I'm going to line the back edge up on those stitches and throw the excess over here. I just think it's going to be easier to trim that way. When I put this, by the way, when I draw this on the final pattern, I will draw the final shape that I cut it out to rather than my first guess. Again, this is prototype by building, right? So, one way that I like to set this up with these little pieces that are just the dickens to try and hold still is to get it arranged on a hard surface. I'm holding it with my fingers in the back. And then I can just press it down. Or not a hard surface, a soft surface. This is a really thick rug. The rug's not going to mind if I poke the needle through it a little bit. Get it on my palm thimble. This is the first video you saw. We have a video making this. We'll talk about things I would do different and modify a little bit on it in the future too. And then just stick straight down using the rug as a backer. Then I can pick it up and I've pierced through my piece of leather. Okay? That keeps the alignment. And after you do this 2, maybe 3 times, it'll stay put. So I'm going to make one more stitch, change my thread, sew around, sew back through, and then we'll talk about the internal sewing on this little triangle. So now we need to finish sewing in this inner triangle in our little gusset flap. So I'm going to stitch in the same way to here and then to there. Okay? So we'll have a stitch line right along there and meet up with that guy. So here you can see the inside all the way around and the show side all the way around. Neater on the show side except for my one silly little missed stitch. Now when I miss a stitch in leather, I just go with it because it's going to leave an annoying hole even if I pull the thread out. Yeah, so if it's going to leave an annoying hole, it might as well have a strong thread in it. Right? So yeah, just go with it. What does help though is when you're pushing through from the back side, it will kind of push up and you can see like a little hump in the leather and sometimes a little lightening as it kind of stretches a little with the needle starting to push up into it. You can approximately gauge where it's going to come out. But it's definitely a thing that needs practice to be able to sew straight and keep the needle dead perpendicular to the fabric when you're sewing through all this thickness. Now, I'm not going to worry about all of the messiness in here because that's going to all get covered up when we make our little pocket. You can see that's how much I cut it down from the previous. Okay. We're going to line the pocket up along the inside of the hem right here. Again, we're going to be stitching the side into this hem, so I don't want to build up too much thickness in too many places. I'm trying to watch that. And I want the top corner up here to kind of just be in line with this rope coming across. Is this all in view? Okay. And we want to overlap the leather and let that stick down into the backstay pocket. And then just make sure, hold your finger there, make sure you can still slide that in. No problem. Okay? So this will just get stitched down, across, over, up. One thing I do want to note, forgot to grab them. With something like this, it's really hard to line some of these things up and clamp them, right? Even with my binder clips that I've been using, they don't go in far enough. So, what I can do is take a couple of square cow magnets. You can get these from any agricultural store, and use them as a clamp. So these can clamp that upper section in place. I can get a couple of stitches in along the lower section. Okay? And once I have a little segment here, then I can take that off and just make sure that it's lined up every time I put a good stitch in. Okay? So not too big a deal. Use these magnets. They're very nice. You can also get little flat round rare earth magnets that are really nice for exactly the same thing. Just see what's around you and what you have access to. I have agricultural stores, so I got cow magnets. Right. So that'll stitch in, and stitching the side of that pocket is what gives us this extra row of stitches through our leather gusset. That's doesn't need to be there for the sake of the gusset, it just happens to be there because the pocket. So we will get this stitched in, and then we'll really be ready to start assembling this thing. The last thing we do before we fully assemble it, we'll be adding the straps to the back up here. Moving along here, these pockets are fully sewn up, and we have trimmed the pieces of wood and given them a nice sanding. Right? So again, they're all smooth. Now these don't have to be quite as perfect as this, because you'll see in the final assembly, this is going to have a lot of direct pressure and rubbing right on the end, whereas these are more or less just stiffeners that are along for the ride. Okay, so there's not going to be that rubbing force. You don't have to be quite as persnickety with those as with our curved stay. Now we're getting ready to attach the shoulder straps. The shoulder straps are going to be this nice wide 2.5-inch webbing. 2-inch wide would be plenty. I got a lucky find of 2.5-inch wide webbing, so I'm using 2.5-inch wide webbing. Now to bind the end here and finish this, this webbing doesn't fray out to the extent that a lot of fabrics do because it's an interlocking stitch, but we still want to make a nice finished edge. So what I've done is taken a couple of pieces of leather, and they're the width of the webbing by 3 inches long. Okay, 2 inches here and then 1 inch in the fold over. Now the fold over is skived on the back at a long angle from the bend to the edge. Okay, and then the terminal edge on the show side is skived just for about a 1/2 inch in. Okay, it's not down to a knife edge, is skived about half thickness. Okay, just to ease it a little bit. So these go on the end, and we're just going to stitch them in place right as we go along, sewing the piece down. But before doing that, just to prepare them and keep them from sliding, I've just run a row of whip stitches just across at an angle and then through and straight down, across at a diagonal, through and straight down. And that's just going to lash that edge right down. So that doesn't want to peel up and catch as, you know, through the use life of the piece. So after making these and skiving them, I put them face to face like this, clamped them in my woodworking vise, wet. Okay? So these are wet formed, pinched in place so that they have a nice sharp crease. You won't get that nice sharp crease with them dry. You need to wet them and then pinch them and hold them pressed as they dry. And you'll get that nice sharp crease. To prepare the pack itself, I have stitched, just with a simple line of stitches, the edge of this rope harness to the top of the pack. Okay, it has memory. This is a little tricky. You might see I got a little bit of a bend in it right here. That's not going to hurt anything at the end of the day. No big deal. It's on the inside anyway. But try to get this as straight as possible. And then we have a leather gusset here, just the same as these, to hold the stitching and keep the stitching from pulling too hard against the canvas. Okay, and I put that in, and the top edge is flush with the back of the rope. Okay, so I haven't stitched the bottom on. Again, it's going to get stitched in place as we attach the shoulder straps, so I don't need to put any extra, but I stitched it along with the rope to hold it in place, so as I'm positioning the shoulder straps, it's not going to be dodging and weaving on me. Okay, so let's flip this over, and if we look at the back, well, my fuzzies off of here. I was doing a little basket weaving last night, and I got some fuzzies on the rug. So these pieces are going to get stitched like this. You can see the edges. All of this in view? Mm-hmm. Okay. You can see the edge there where I did those little whip stitches. I want that a little bit high above the rope, and you can see this line of stitches here is marking the rope. So I want that to be setting just above the rope, and I want the outside edge of my leather piece touching the inside corner of my stitching on the stay pocket. Okay? So we're going to stitch across right through the rope, tying this whole assembly into the rope. So it's pulling against that rope harness before it pulls on the canvas. Okay? And I'm going to stitch a square, and then I'm going to stitch the X from corner to corner of the square. Okay? And all of those stitches are going to go through rope, canvas, and the leather gusset on the inside. So one will be there, the other will be there, and then these will fold down like that, forming the straps in use. So I'm going to do that. That's just a lot more of the same. I'm going to do that off camera. You can see the layout, but I wanted to show these leather pieces in particular. And again, these two end caps on the straps are the width of the strap plus 3 inches, 1 inch to fold over on the back, just to give a nice finished edge there. And the internal leather gusset is 3 inches tall by 6 wide. We have stitched these on. Now that's a very thick wad of stuff to be forcing a needle through, right? So this takes some time. Go slow, be careful, try to get your needle poking out in the right spots as best you can. Hand stitching, you're going to have some irregularity no matter what you do. Machine stitching, go for it. If you have a machine that can stitch that, of course, use it, right? But I want to show you that this can be done by hand, right? And this was just my number 16 sail needle forcing through with a palm thimble is how I did both of these. So you can do it. You can do this by hand if you don't have a machine. Now, I did run, because let me just pull this up a little bit, right? So here's where those are, and then I just stitched the bottom down here. I could have made that that gusset a little bit smaller, but I'm not sad about having it a little bit too big, right? It's one more thing adding a little bit of internal support in our pack, so that's good. And there you can see our straps, and this will be something, sort of kind of like that going on. And I cut both of these longer than I think I'm going to need them so that I can cut back to what I'm actually going to have. And we're going to have a leather piece on here for belt holes. There's going to be more going on there, but I'm going to worry about that after the rest of it's assembled. And with all of this, it stands up nice, right? It's got a good amount of support. That's what I was looking for. It's flexible. It's flexible enough, right? This upright can bend and twist, so it's not going to be forced into the wearer's back, create a hot spot. But it's got enough support, it's just holding itself up right there. So that's the balance we wanted to hit. So I'm very happy with that. Now, let me pull these stays out, because they're not going to do us any favors with the next step. We're going to leave these pockets open just a little bit longer. The next thing we're going to do is to start the final assembly. Okay? And we're going to take our sides and sew the flap at the base around our rope here. Adjust the loops so that they're right in the corner, just like we did before. And then we're going to sew the front on across the bottom like that. Okay? And this is in preparation to put the bottom on. I'm going to leave all of this open until the bottom is sewed on. Then we will close up, we'll put the stays in, stitch them permanently, stitch this around, put our little loop of webbing across the back, stitch that in place, and then start sewing the sides up and finishing it. Okay? But I want to get all of these attached at the bottom and the bottom piece in first while it's all accessible. Okie dokie, we have all of these bottom pieces sewn around that lower rope hoop. I put the curved stay back in, and this is about to become permanent. So the next thing that we need to do is we need to take our piece of webbing. I cut this 20 inches, thinking 1 inch of overhang would be good to stitch in, and it will be fine. However, I would recommend that you give yourself 2 inches of overlap after having assembled this. Okay? So in the pattern, this is going to be written up as a 22-inch piece, just for a little bit more to work with. But we're going to measure in an inch so that we have an 18-inch strip in the middle. We're going to lay that on here. And we're going to fold this around, stitch that down. And as we stitch that down, we're going to catch the end of the pocket. Okay? We're going to stitch that in too. So that will be stitched around there. And then this will be stitched around there. And that's going to be our back support piece. Okay? That will be the very next thing that we do. And once that is put in and attached, we'll look at our bottom. That is sewed on. And we want to get all this little stuff done, make sure it's right, make sure it's proper, make sure it's where you want it, because this area of the pack is about to get very, very inaccessible, right? We're going to put the bottom on next. You can see that nice spacer, nice air circulation in behind the back, and that really hugs the hips when you're walking with it. So, here's our bottom piece. Now, in treating this, we've done a hem on the machine, we've done a bar tack on these corners. We shouldn't need to snip these corners. If you're laying your thing out and you think you might need a snip somewhere, put a bar tack behind it. You can always add an extra bar tack, not a big deal. So we have our strap sewn in, and that worked out quite nicely. It is a bit bulky right there, but that shouldn't be too much of a problem, especially that low on the pack. Now, the next two things that we need to do are firstly sew the bottom in and then start sewing up the sides. So I want to get the bottom in before doing the rest of these things. The bottom piece I have hemmed twice. Okay, so we did the normal hem with one fold, just like that seam, and most of these ones that I'm wrapping around the rope, I'm only hemming once just to save bulk, because the rope is going to add a lot of bulk. The ones that I'm not wrapping around the rope and I'm going to sew canvas to canvas, I'm hemming twice to make a nicer, neater finished edge. So the outside that's not hemmed, we're going to set against the inside of the pack. Okay. And then we're going to sew through this hem and through that hem. Okay. So that way, after it's sewn in, let me just put 2 clips here just for kind of a show and tell. Right. After it's sewn in, all the stitching tail ends will be hidden, and it will fold out nice and make a nice finished join. This is the part where it really starts to get fun, because we can see it coming out. Even without everything sewn up, it's holding its shape very nicely, and I'm really happy with this pattern. So we got the front all the way sewn up. Around here we got the bottom all the way sewn up. The bottom came in nicely, but it has a little bit of a fold here. Now, I had wanted this to be flat across the front and curved in the back, and that's as it came out. But I had originally designed this bottom pattern piece in sort of a dog bone shape, okay? Distributing the flare and the edges to both sides and then bringing it in evenly in the middle. And that was just to make a symmetrical pattern piece, because if you can have a symmetrical pattern piece, it's easier to work with. It's especially if you have a pattern fabric, right? So I'm making this for a heavy-duty field pack. But if somebody wanted to make this out of a pattern fabric for like a LARP costume or something, and you use an asymmetrical fabric, then having an asymmetrical pattern makes pattern matching a little bit more interesting, right? So I was trying to keep it symmetrical, but this fold in it, this little wrinkle that's going to be there forever, is not structurally bad, but it annoys my perfectionism, right? So I'm going to redesign this pattern piece in the finished pattern when I draw that all up, and it's going to be flat on one side and throw all of the curve into the other, and I'm just going to trace the backstay, right, to make that curve in the back. So that will make it a little bit easier to stitch the bottom in for future packs. But there's certainly nothing wrong with this. It's just not having that perfectly flat annoys my perfectionism. We stitched the front up around the rope. That came together quite nicely. And now the last thing we need to do to assemble this guy is stitching the sides up. We're going to do that exactly the same way. We're going to take this hem to edge. We're going to fold it. We're going to set the back of that fold right against the edge of the rope. And then we're going to stitch through this hem and that hem. Okay? So we're stitching through both hems with the edge of the hem right flush with the edge of the vertical ropes. We're going to do that all the way up. And this is going to get more and more congested and a little bit slower as it goes, but that's the process. Then once that's done, we will stitch these vertical stays in permanently, and then we'll look at adjusting and sewing the last little bit of rope in. We have a thing. This pack is at this point fully assembled. Now there's still some final touches to do on it. We'll talk about that here in a second. But we have the flaps. You can see that configuration. We're going to end up with a tie system attached here, or probably down there, to tie this flap down, and then a tie system attached here to tie the overall flap down. Okay, that's coming. That's a finishing touch. We have fully stitched all of our rope work in. Okay, we've stitched this to the front. We've stitched this to the sides and the back. It holds its shape really, really nicely. All of the wooden stays are fully installed. And again, we're going to attach a system of ropes or not ropes, but shoelaces, right? Shoelace style ties to come into these holes and pull this together and the sides together in finishing touches, okay? But the thing is assembled. Now, in addition to working with the ties, what do we still need to do? Well, we need to put coverings in a couple places. So here at the bottom corners, you can see the rope sticks out. So there's a couple ways that you could do a covering for these corner caps. I'm going to do something stitched in place. We need to do that yet. We need to attach all of these shoelace ties that I'm talking about. And this, to attach these corners together, ended up with sort of a ramp coming down, okay, here on this middle section. And I just did a little bit of a whipping on top to get it all bundled up together and attached nicely. But I want to put a covering on this as well, okay, to make that look nicer. That's an aesthetic decision. You could, all of that's aesthetic. You could load stuff in here and go schlepping through the woods right now, okay? Except for the last thing on the back, which is the buckles, okay? Now, the buckle that you have will determine a lot about how you proceed here, okay? If you have a webbing strap, you could use webbing for the bottom instead of leather and just go with that. I have a roller buckle system, so I'm going to attach some leather extensions to these pieces of webbing and then the lower roller buckle to these, and that will be a final touch. So all of these final touches are going to be in their own separate video. That is the next thing I'm going to work on here, along with finalizing the pattern, because now we've fully tested everything. The next video up on the channel is going to be a pack basket video, a little bit of a spacer to give me time to fully finalize this pattern and get these things done. And then 2 weeks from now, we'll have the final touches video on this project. So I hope that you'll give her a like and a subscribe so that you don't miss out on that. And go check out our Patreon, where somewhere in the intervening week and a half, 2 weeks, the pattern will appear. Hope to see you there as well, and I hope to see you back here at Old Ways Rising Farm.